Well, let's get into the word together, shall we? I was in Judges chapter 6 today, and it really spoke to me. It's a very, very powerful record. Um, and I really felt like there were just so many things in the record in Judges 6 that are applicable to us today. And I thank you all for your prayers and for the manifestations. And so let's go to Judges chapter 6. And this is the record of Gideon. And obviously, once again, Israel is in trouble. And we'll read about this, and we're just going to kind of follow through and see how it worked and what happened, how God moved. And it starts out by saying, and the children of Israel did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, and Yahweh gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And what this is saying, and I think there's been questions, we've had phone calls in, is what's going on with the coronavirus a judgment of God? Has America turned away from God? That kind of thing. And it's not that I think that there's a specific judgment of God, but I know that we could do more as a Christian nation. We could do more than we've done. And I think that that's an area where, as Christians, we need to step up to the plate a little more. Hebrews 10 talks about, let us provoke one another to love and good works. And the line between being helpful and being judgmental or not helping in the right way can be pretty thin. But the other side of the coin is there are some times when we can really talk with our brother and sister Christians, our fellow sister Christians, even if we lead out like, hey, I'm really working on my prayer life. How are you doing on yours? Hey, I'm really working on, spending a little more time in the Bible. How are you doing? How's your study program? Some way of alerting other Christians, pulling other Christians more strongly into the faith. What are we doing to help other Christians, remind ourselves? There's important things for us to do. And here, when it says God sold Yahweh gave them into the hand of Midian, what is going on behind the scenes is the adversary is always aggressive. He's always trying to get a foothold. He's always trying to attack. And so we rely on God at that spiritual level. And if we are being disobedient, or if we're not being as obedient as we could be, should be, then we really do effectively tie God's hands. And so verse 2 says, and the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. And because of Midian, and by the way, Midian is it's across from Israel, the Jordan River from Israel, and it's further south. If you can kind of picture the Sinai Peninsula in your mind, the Midian is to the just to the east of the Sinai Peninsula. And it says, so the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of Midian, the children of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. And why is that? Because when the Midianites came, and they didn't come alone, they brought Amalekites, they brought a lot of Bedouins. And when they came into Israel, they would then destroy, take things. And so the Israelites were doing the best they could to hide things. And so verse 3 says, and so it was when Israel had sown their crops that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites and the children of the east. The children of the east are the ones that we know as the roving Bedouin tribes that were in the east of what is the eastern part, well, it's actually the western part of what is now Saudi Arabia, in that desert area. And so these guys came up, they came up against Israel, verse 4, and they encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land as far as Gaza. Now, when it says as far as Gaza, Gaza is almost literally all the way to the coast, the Mediterranean coast, and it's also down south. And it's an area that in the book of Joshua, the Joshua and his armies never quite conquered that area. And so basically what it's saying is the Midianites, the Amalekites, the children of the east, they came in from the east and they swept all the way across Israel, all the way into through the territory that the Israelites had conquered. And look what it says they do here. It says they destroyed the produce of the land as far as Gaza and left no sustenance for Israel and no sheep or ox or donkey. And we'll read that again. In fact, in verse 5 here, we'll read it again. For they came up with their livestock and their tents. They would come up like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted. And they came into the land to destroy it. Now that's twice in 2 verses that it's told you that what these people do is destroy. One of the questions that I get a lot of times is, John, you know, the Old Testament doesn't say a lot about Satan, doesn't say a lot about the devil, doesn't say a lot about demons, you know, and yet here comes Jesus Christ on the scene, and he knows so much about the devil and demons, and where did he learn that? And the answer to that really is in John chapter 8, where Christ looked at the Pharisees and he said, you are of your father, the devil, and the works of your father you will do. You see, people who are in league with the devil do what the devil would do if he himself were present, just like Jesus Christ said, you know, I always do the works of my Father. Jesus Christ represented God, and then Christ said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Well, in this case, if you've seen the Midianites, you've seen the devil. And later on, you know, you look at the various armies that attack Israel. If you've seen them, and if you see how those devilish people behave, and if you go through the scripture and you read about the sons of Belial, the sons of the devil, and you look at how they behave and what they do, if you've seen them, you've seen the devil. So Jesus Christ was very spiritually sensitive. And so he's reading and studying the records of the Old Testament, and he's picking up on, okay, this is what the devil does. This is how the devil operates. This is what demons do. And in this case, it doesn't say they came up and ate the produce. I'm sure they ate plenty of it, but they came to destroy. And here in John 10:10, what does Christ say? The thief doesn't come, but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. And that's something that we've got to be aware of. Like I have no doubt that there are demonic forces behind this COVID virus. I think there's probably demonic forces in how it got started. I think there's demonic forces in how it spreads. I think there's demonic people that are trying to frustrate the efforts of others who are trying to be healers, or in the midst of other people's work, trying to hurt innocent people, shut down the nation, or do other things. There's demonic forces at work here. And what that tells me is that Christian people need to stand up and pray and witness and help each other and encourage each other, because the devil comes to steal and kill and destroy. And he did it here, and he's doing it with the COVID virus. And we as Christians can't sit back and can't sit back and I'll say this, can't sit back and be naive enough to just say, oh, well, we're just going to kind of sit back and chill and say an occasional prayer, and then the virus is just going to kind of run its course. There are demonic forces here. Don't be fooled. Don't let them destroy you, your family, your loved ones. Don't let them destroy this nation. Don't let them destroy other nations. We got brothers and sisters all around the world that really need help. And they need our prayers, just like the people in the United States need our prayers, like our family needs our prayers. Don't kid yourself. These Midianites, Amalekites, children of the East, they didn't just come up to take a few things and go home. They came up to destroy God's people. It happened. This is the Judges period. My goodness, this is 3,500 years ago. The stuff is still happening today. So they came and they took everything. They came up with their livestock and their tents, and they came up in force. And verse 6 says, Israel was brought very low because of Midian. And the Hebrew text here uses a word that's very purposely obscure. It doesn't say they were broke. It doesn't say they were sick. It said they were brought low. And that's literally brought low in every way. They were discouraged and beaten. I mean, their houses had been torn down, their fields had been burned, their animals had been killed, some wives had been raped, some daughters had been carried away captive, some young men had been killed. There's a feeling of despair in the country, and there's physical poverty as well. Israel is brought low. And in that low estate, Israel had been kind of proud before, if you will. They're going to ignore God. They're going to do their own thing. They're going to go their own way. God's going to point this out in a minute. But now all of a sudden they're brought low. And so they're discouraged. And there's only one way out. And it's a 3-letter word, G-O-D. And so they get on their knees and they cry and they repent. And it says, verse 6, Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the children of East cried out to Yahweh. Amen. And see, we're in that situation right now. There are people in this country, and I know of some, because, sitting at the top of this ministry, we get phone calls. I know of some people who have really honestly never paid much attention to God in their life before that now are. It's amazing. I've had some amazing conversations, even personally. There are people who are on the cusp of changing. We've got to be right there for them in prayer, in words of encouragement, in phone calls, in texts. And, don't worry about barging into somebody's life. If you're sitting around at your desk having a cup of coffee or whatever, and a name pops into your head, just have faith that that's of God and give that person a call, send that person a text, shoot that person an email. Let's see what we can do here to really solidify some of the commitment in people's hearts. And he says, so they cried out to Yahweh. In verse 7, and it came to pass when the children of Israel cried out to Yahweh because of Midian. I love this, that Yahweh sent a prophet to the children of Israel. You see, God, in this situation, God's God. He's pretty powerful. He could have just simply moved behind the scenes and done some things. But really, the game here is everlasting life. The game here isn't really, hey, I'm going to get your sheep back. I'm going to get your cow back. I'm going to get your field back. God's heart is, I want you, the children of Israel, to live forever. And for that to happen, you've got to come back to me in your heart. That's where you and I are right now as ambassadors for Christ. I feel so badly for people that are out of work. I feel so badly for people that have lost their jobs, for people that are wondering where their next rent check is going to come from, that kind of thing. But I should feel as badly for people that are just kind of waking up to, maybe there is a God, and I could live forever. Yeah, sure, you could get a rent check, something like that. But if you got a rent check and you don't have everlasting life, let me tell you something, you don't have a whole lot. And it's my job and it's your job to help people realize that it's not about a rent check. Is a rent check good? Yes. Is food money good? Yes. Is clothing good? Yes. All those things are wonderful. What's really wonderful is everlasting life. If God moves in you to hand, I've talked to some people that have given people money there. I've never given money before to these people, and I'm giving money now. Great. Also give the gospel. Make sure you give the gospel. And so I love the fact that God here, he doesn't just deliver the children of Israel. He raises up a prophet. And look where the prophet goes. The prophet goes right for the heart. See, you and I are that prophet. We've got to go right to the heart of these people. And it says, they cried out to Yahweh. Verse 8, Yahweh sent a prophet to the children of Israel. Look how honest this prophet is with them. He doesn't pull any punches. He says, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up from Egypt I took you out of the house of slavery. I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all who oppressed you. And I drove them out from before you and gave you their land. Look at the promised land you're living in. And I said to you, I am Yahweh your God. And of course, Deuteronomy 6:4 had been long written by now. You know, hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. You know, and he says, I am Yahweh your God. And he says, I don't fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you've not listened to my voice. And that's the end of the prophet. Now, that's kind of cool. The prophet didn't give them instruction and say, this is what I want you to do. They already had that, for Pete's sake. They had the 5 books of Moses. They had the example of Joshua, the example of Caleb, the example of Ehud, the example of Deborah. They had some wonderful examples. They knew what to do. They just, it's like somebody who knows to pray and doesn't pray. It's not about knowing you need to pray. It's about deciding it's making that decision. It's making it a plan to where you pull it off. And so the prophet just comes up and all he does is he puts that rock in their shoe to make them uncomfortable. You know, he says, you haven't listened to my voice. And now they've got to think on that, stew on that, and hearts are going to begin to shift. And we start to see that, because now, verse 11, and this is really interesting. I love how this works. The angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And there's a lot here, so let's unpack this verse. First of all, the angel of Yahweh comes, and you know what does he do? He sits under an oak tree, shady. It's nice and shady and comfortable. And so the angel shows up and he sits under the oak tree. And by the way, we're not positive. It's a funny word for oak. It's not the normal word for oak. Some have even suggested it's a pistachio tree. It's a tabernacle tree. There's a number of other things that people think it might be, but it also could be an oak. But in any case, so the angel comes and he sits under the oak that was in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. So if the oak belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, it's on his property. And Joash's son Gideon was beating out wheat in the wine press. And you know, a wine press is a sunken area in the ground. It's not big. It may be 8 by 8, 10 by 10, 12 by 12, not much bigger than that at the most. But it was sunken in the ground. And so Gideon could put the wheat in there, and then somebody looking across the plain wouldn't see it. And this is hard to represent in English and make it make sense. But you know, remember that the Israelites are hiding in dens and in caves, and so everything's kind of hiding. And it says that when he's beating out wheat in the wine press to hide it from the Midianites, the Hebrew is something like for it to flee from the Midianites. So even the wheat is running away from the Midianites, and that's represented in the Hebrew text. The Israelites are running away, the wheat is running away, but we represent it as to hide from the Midianites. Verse 12, and the angel of Yahweh appeared to him. Now, we'll see later in the text, there's no indication that the angel moved at all. Either it's kind of like the ram in the thicket with Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, that Abraham simply didn't notice the ram, Gideon didn't notice the guy sitting under the tree, or maybe he was in his, kind of angel invisible uniform, and all of a sudden he became visible, but he didn't. We're going to see that he likely did not get up from the tree and walk over to Gideon or whatever, but all of a sudden now Gideon notices him sitting under the tree. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O mighty warrior. So now Gideon looks at this guy, and it's not like he has a halo or anything. He's He's a stranger sitting under a tree. That's what Gideon gets. It's like, Christ at the, when he was talking about how Christians are to follow and believers are to follow Christ. And he said, that to be hospitable, I was the stranger at the door type of thing, and here's this stranger and he just pipes up and he says to Gideon, Yahweh is with you, O mighty warrior. In verse 13, and Gideon said to him, O my Lord, and the word Lord here is Adoni, and it simply means my Lord. And it's probably the lowest form of Adon that you can use and still call somebody Lord. What's going to happen in the record is Gideon is going to start with Adoni, simply a polite address, my Lord, because what's Gideon think? It's a stranger sitting under a tree. Does he know he's an angel? No. Does he think he's a prophet? Not even that. He's a stranger sitting under a tree. And he speaks, and Gideon's like, oh, Adoni, later on it's going to be Adonai, meaning, Lord, like this could be an angel or God. And then later on, he recognizes that he is an angel representing God. So we watch the progression, that there's a progression here of Gideon's realization of who he's dealing with. But right now, he just thinks he's a stranger under a tree. And so Gideon says to him, oh, my Lord, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us? Where are all his wondrous works that our fathers told us of, saying, didn't Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now, and I love this, now Yahweh has abandoned us, poor us. Yahweh has abandoned us. Gideon's father has an altar of Baal. It's like, excuse me, who's abandoned who here? There's an altar of Baal in Gideon's house, for Pete's sake. And yet, woe is me, Yahweh has abandoned me. And this is one of the things, this is why right now in these crisis times, people are willing to listen, people are willing to talk, they've got time to talk. Some of them have a lot more time to talk. And we can use the wisdom of God and the love of God and the kindness of God and the gentleness of God to and just to figure out, God, lead me in bringing up stuff that will really help people come to realization. God, excuse me, God has left you. But see, it shows that look at what we're learning about human nature. Talk about a little mini lesson. Human nature is all me focused. Here's Gideon. His house has an altar to Baal. Yahweh's abandoned me. Yahweh's abandoned us. That's human nature. And it's up to you and I to see things clearly enough. We bring things back where they belong. See, now Yahweh has abandoned us and has given us into the hand of Midian. And then here's another nifty lesson, because at this point, what the angel could have done was started waving his arms and ranting and raving and shouting about how Gideon and his family had abandoned God, but he just leaves it alone. And in desperate times, you're going to run into people. They're probably scared. They might be scared of dying. They might be scared of getting sick. They might have little children they're afraid for, elderly parents they're afraid for. They're afraid they may not have food money. People are afraid. And when people are afraid, they think about themselves. And what we need to know is we need to just be able to come in with that kind, gentle, comforting word. They can rant and rave. We don't have to respond to that. Here's Gideon ranting and raving, Yahweh's abandoned us. You know what? The angel is nothing. He just lets that argument die. He doesn't take the bait. And you and I, if we're going to be pastors, we can't take the bait. We've got to learn how to get in there and love people. And so the angel, verse 14, watch how verse 14 opens up here. It doesn't say the angel. It says, and Yahweh. And that's because, it was the angel. But the angel is speaking for Yahweh. And in the Semitic custom and in the Semitic idiom, if you were speaking for somebody, if you were a client speaking for a patron, or you were an agent speaking for the originator, the author agent thing, then you could speak in the first person. And that's why, the Jesus didn't even answer Jesus says to the guy that's lame, son, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees, who can forgive sins but God alone? If you notice, Christ didn't say what a dumb thing. He just said, hey, what's harder, to say get up and walk, or to say your sins are forgiven? But hey, say get up and walk, and then the guy does. And so we learn just to deal with arguments wisely. Don't take things personally. Walking with God. The angel just says, and Yahweh turned toward him. So this is, the angel now turns his head, catches his gaze, eye to eye, and Gideon is looking through the eyes of that angel right into the face of Yahweh. And Yahweh turned toward him and said, go in this your might and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? And Gideon here, verse 15, he said to him, oh Lord, how can I, and this is the Adonai, the Adonai, see, Adonai. The first was Adoni, this is Adonai. So he's recognizing that this guy is saying things that aren't normal. This isn't a normal stranger. So now he's upped his game. Adonai, oh Adonai, how can I save Israel? Behold, my family is the poorest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. And we're going to learn later that those are probably understatements. And Moses did almost exactly the same thing. If we go back, he says, how can I save Israel? Behold, my family is the poorest. I'm the least in my father's house. Verse 16, and Yahweh said to him, because I will be with you. And if you just take a quick look at Exodus chapter 3, when God first approached Moses in the same way, via an angel in a burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. And he said, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh in verse 10 and verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And how does God answer through the angel? Verse 12, certainly I will be with you. So this is a number of 100 years later, and it's the same kind of thing. God says, you're going to save Israel. And verse 15, back in Judges 6, and Gideon says to him, oh Adonai, how can I save Israel? Behold, my family is the poorest in Manasseh. I'm the least in my father's house. And Yahweh says, how can you save Israel? Because I will be with you. That's the answer. Because I'm with you. That's how you can do it. And that's always the answer, isn't it? It's because God is with us that we can do it. That's why we can do it. It's not because I'm so great, you're so great, I'm so smart, you're so smart, we're whatever the heck it happens to be, we're so powerful or whatever, has nothing at all to do with that. The answer is exactly what God said here, because I will be with you. That is the one singular right answer and the only answer that makes sense. And if you and I, this can be hard because, you've got kind of like 2 different days of the week. And one day of the week, I'm feeling like Paul, that everything I want to do, I can't do. And everything I hate, that's the thing I seem to be doing. And nothing seems to be working out. And what's wrong with me? What's wrong with life? And, like Paul, oh, wretched man that I am, and then the next day, it's like it's Christ in me, the hope of glory. And you go marching out. And this is one of those where it's just, how can I save Israel? Because I will be with you. And then this angel says, and you will strike the Midianites as one man. Just like, you can kill one guy, right, Gideon? You can get one guy, you're going to smite Israel. The Midianites like they're one guy. In verse 17, now at this point, Gideon is gotten that this is not just a regular stranger. Hasn't figured out he's an angel yet, thinking he's a prophet. But in any case, he says in verse 17, he said to him, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, and I love the please here. See, Gideon, there's some genuine humility here. Please, if I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that you are speaking with me. And, you know, 1,000 years later, 1,500 years later, something like that, the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, I believe it's verse 22, says, the Jews ask for a sign. They always have, you know, and here it is, you know, show me a sign that you are speaking with me, which you have to understand the idiom. It's not show me a sign that you're talking with me. I mean, I've got ears, I can tell you're talking with me. But in other words, show me a sign that you have the authority to say these things to me. And if we take a step back for a second, because, you know, for a long time I thought of this as kind of a weakness, that Moses needed a sign, Gideon needed a sign, but really the signs can be really helpful. And you can see this if we go to, let's go back to Exodus, and let's go to Exodus chapter 4 just a second. Because in Exodus chapter 4, Moses is still complaining to God about going to the Egyptians and the Israelites in Egypt. And he says in verse 1, behold, they will not believe me nor listen to my voice. Let's pick up on the Hebrew there. They will not believe me or listen to my voice. And so what happens here is God gives him something as a sign. Verse 2, Yahweh said, what's in your hand? He said, a staff. You guys know the record. Moses throws the staff on the ground and it becomes a snake. And then he says, God says, put your hand inside your cloak, and he puts it in, and when he pulls it out, it's leprous. And then he puts his hand back in his cloak and it gets healed. And verse 8 is very important. God says to Moses, it will happen if they will not believe you or listen to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the second sign. And it really is, there's really a truth that when we do things, it has a voice, it has an impact. Those signs speak. I can tell you that in 1971, when I was still a bit unsaved, and that little girl sat across she wasn't little, she was in college, but she sat across the sofa from me, and she spoke in tongues, and I'll tell you what, the voice of that sign in my heart and in my mind, she might as well have been a lion sitting on that couch and roaring. I mean, I'd never heard speaking in tongues. And when that language flowed out of her, I knew in my heart, I knew in my soul that there's something here and I want it. You know, and signs can have a voice like that. If we pray for people and you're getting a revelation as you pray and you mention stuff that they know you don't know, or you speak in tongues and interpret for them, or you just speak in tongues for them, or you minister to them and a day later they're feeling better, those signs speak. That's why the scripture encourages us to walk in power. Absolutely, we walk in power. So show me a sign, he says in Judges chapter 6, verse 17. And then in verse 18, he says, please don't go away from here until I come back to you and bring out my gift and lay it before you. Now, this is important because what he's going to do is going to take some time. He's not going to go away for like 3 or 4 minutes. So he talks to this guy that he still thinks is a prophet, and he says, look, just sit tight here a second, will you? I mean, just can you tell me you won't leave? And then the angel says, last half of verse 18, and he said, I will sit until you come back. And a number of the English versions, as both Schlegel and I were looking at this, a large number of the English versions said something like, I will wait until you get back, I will stay until you get back. But the Hebrew word is very clearly sit. Now, in some contexts, the word sit can mean wait or stay, but here, the angel started out by sitting under the oak. And there's no evidence that in the entire record up till now that he's gotten up. He's done this whole thing just sitting back, relaxed against the tree, which is pretty cool if we think of the mini lesson in that We don't have to be up in somebody's face and all excited to make an impression. You sit under an oak tree, get a cup of coffee, and talk to somebody. If you're speaking clearly and you're speaking boldly and you're speaking with the authority of God, you can change the world. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so basically, so Gideon goes running off, verse 19, and he went inside, which tells you he had a house. So he goes inside and he prepares a young goat and unleavened cake of an ephah of flour. This is one guy sitting under a tree. Gideon prepares a whole young goat and 4 gallons of flour. If you can think of a gallon bucket and fill 4 of those with flour and then make bread out of those, that's how much bread Gideon had, and what Gideon sacrificing, considering how valuable, bread was at this point. To offer this one guy 4 gallons of flour that he's making bread with, and a whole goat, it shows you that this man had touched Gideon's heart, and Gideon was pretty sure he was dealing with a man of God that was genuinely in touch with God. And so he brings this out, and it no small cost. I mean, this is a famine. This is expensive stuff. And look at verse 20. And the angel of God said to him, well, take the meat and the unleavened cake, lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth. And that was a great test for Gideon. Because Gideon's like, hey, look, if you're going to waste it, I've got a lot of hungry friends. And there are times when God stretches us in ways that we don't understand. It's like, I don't understand why you're stretching me in this way. I don't understand why you had me go here or talk to this person or read this or do this or whatever it happened to be. But this is an example. See, God knows, this is the start of Gideon's being stretched. God knows that Gideon is going to be really stretched, and you and I will be stretched too as we obey God. And so here, he asks him, he says, look, take the meat, take the bread, put them on this rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon had a choice to make, and he made the right choice. He obeyed God. He did so. Verse 21, then the angel of Yahweh stretched out the end of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire went up out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of Yahweh, bang, he's gone. Just poof, he did his angel thing and he's gone. And that got Gideon's attention. Verse 22, and Gideon saw that he was an angel of Yahweh. And Gideon said, alas, Lord Yahweh, because I've seen the angel of Yahweh face to face. And this goes back to Exodus chapter 33, when God had said to Moses, no one will see me and live. But we have to understand that there was a special context to that. That gets taken today, and people just run wild with it. But think a second now. When God said that to Moses, God had already appeared face to face to Adam and Eve. God had already appeared face to face with Abraham. God had already appeared face to face with Jacob. God had already appeared face to face with Moses himself and the 24 elders of Israel who walked up Mount Sinai and saw God. So it can't be that if you just see God, you'll die. And here's Gideon. He's been talking to this guy now for probably hours. If he was going to die when he first saw him, he would have been dead a couple hours ago. So he's obviously not dead. But it's amazing when some people, and this is, again, see, a kind of a mini lesson, whereas as pastors and teachers and comforters and stuff, we can get into people's soul, because, like, a word of comfort, if you were to sit down next to Gideon, would have been, hey Gideon, how long ago did you meet this guy? Oh, a couple hours ago. Have you died yet? No. Why? Well, obviously looking at him isn't going to kill you. Just a calm voice of logic can do so much. And you and I have the privilege of being that calm voice of logic in tough situations. But Gideon, he's just got this religious thing that comes up. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, and it takes the calm voice, and I like this. And then I love how verse 23, Yahweh said to him, and the angel's gone. So this is apparently just a voice, just a voice that speaks. Peace be to you, shalom, well-being. Don't be afraid, you will not die. And what was Gideon's response? He built an altar there to Yahweh and called it Yahweh is peace. And to this day, it's still an altar of the Abiezrites, meaning that when the book of Judges was written, that altar was still there. Verse 25, it came to pass the same night that Yahweh said to him, take your father's bull, even the second bull 7 years old. Now, how long had the children of Israel been enslaved and oppressed by Midian? 7 years. So this bull was born when the Midianite oppression started. So he's going to sacrifice this bull now. And symbolically, behind the scenes, this bull is dying and the Midianite oppression is coming to an end. So there's a kind of a mini lesson going on behind the scene here. He says, take your father's bull, even the second bull of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that's beside it. Good grief. Here's Gideon's dad in the household. They've got an altar to Baal. They've got an Asherah pole. So they got the male goddess, the thunder god Baal, god of storms and fertility. They got the female goddess in there. And, and then they're, Yahweh, you've abandoned us. And see, we can help people with that, because people will wonder, and this is just kind of getting to know people in honest conversations, but there are people that have statues of saints they pray to. There are people that look at the horoscope every day. There are people that have their lucky objects, that kind of thing. God doesn't like any of that. We can help people. So it's a calm, loving, kind, well-spoken, properly timed voice of reason, but it's important that things like that be spoken. Absolutely. So it says, throw down the altar of Baal, verse 26, and build an altar to Yahweh your God on top of this stronghold in an orderly way, and take the second bull and offering a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you cut down. Verse 27. Now, watch this. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants. It doesn't say Gideon just had 10 servants. It says Gideon took 10 men of his servants. Now, he had just gotten through saying a little while ago that his father was poor in Manasseh and he was the least in his father's house. And yet he himself personally has more than 10 servants. So he understated his position to the angel. And that, by the way, is just a standard kind of Eastern custom. You never wanted to act like a braggart, so you understate your situation. And so we didn't learn. I mean, if we didn't know this, we'd read the early part of the Judges and we go, well, poor Gideon, his father's poor and he's the least in his father's house. Now from the record, we know that his father's a landowner. His father's got a big altar to Baal with an Asherah pole. People from the city go to his house and worship. He's got a whole bunch of servants. No wonder the angel said, you mighty man. See, now we learn what's it take to run a household with a whole bunch of servants. You got to have some leadership ability. Otherwise, the servants are just going to run all over you and run amok, and you're not going to get much done. And so now we're wondering, where did Gideon get this leadership ability? He'd had it all along. It manifested in his household. So verse 27, Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as Yahweh had spoken to him. But because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, that he did it by night. That was partially fear and even maybe a little bit of wisdom thrown in, because that way he can get the whole job. He can get the altar of Baal torn down. He can build an altar to Yahweh. He can cut down the Asherah pole. If he had started to do that during the day, he probably would have gotten interrupted. But at nighttime, he went and he got the entire job done. But it does tell you that he was afraid. And there's a great lesson in this, because a lot of times people will let a little bit of fear stop them. or they feel ungenuine. They feel like, well, if I'm doing this and I'm afraid that it's not genuine. And that's not true. You know, we can have some fear and trepidation in doing God's work, and it still be the honest and true thing to do. And here it is with Gideon, same thing. A little bit of fear, a little bit of trepidation, but he's doing the work anyway. And that's an important lesson. And again, a kind of a mini lesson, a word of encouragement for people. And they say, well, I'm kind of frightened to pray. Okay, it's not a sin. You know, I'm kind of frightened to manifest in one of these meetings, and maybe I'd make a mistake or something. Okay, it's not a sin to be frightened. Just push through your fear. Give it a shot, you know, and we can encourage people and we can help people. That's exactly what happened to Gideon. He didn't say, oh, I'm afraid, so I'm not going to do it. He did it in spite of his fear. That's a nifty little mini lesson, and we can help people that way. And then, of course, verse 28, when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, and the Asherah that was by it was cut down. The second bull was offered upon the altar that had been built. They said one to another, who did this thing? When they had searched and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. The men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son. Now these are Israelite men, and this is the tribe of Manasseh. So this is one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and these are Israelite men. And look at what they say. Bring out your son. He must die because he's broken down the altar of Baal and because he's cut down the Asherah that was by it. Wow, there are some people that can get seriously misled about religion. They should be saying, finally, we've found a leader that we can get behind to clean all this junk out of Israel. You know, and sometimes when you're trying to do the right thing, even from people that you would expect would be supportive, you've got to really take a hard stand. It's a good thing to know here. And I love, thank God for Gideon's dad. At least he finally stepped up to the plate. Joash said to all who stood against him, will you contend for Baal or will you save him? The one who will contend for him, let him be put to death while it's morning. If he's a god, let him contend for himself because someone's broken down his altar. That makes good sense. Therefore, on that day, he named Gideon, Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend against him because he's broken down his altar. And so Jerub comes from the word contend, and Baal, of course, we know that the name of the god Baal. So you've got contend and Baal put together. I tend to think that because it was Gideon cutting down the altar of Baal, that the way they thought about it was something like Baal fighter, something along that line. He was the Baal warrior, the Baal fighter, the one who would contend with Baal. And so then the children of the east and the Amalekites come up, and in verse 34, but the spirit of Yahweh clothed Gideon, came over Gideon. He blew a shofar, that's to organize an army. The Abiezrites were called together to follow him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they were gathered together after him. He sent messengers to Asher, and Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. And so now you think, okay, I'm ready to attack, but Gideon still has that fear. And the beauty of Gideon is not that he didn't have any fear, but that he learned to push through the fear that he had. Some people may have a fear of praying. Some people may have a fear of manifesting. Some people may have a fear of witnessing. There's a lot of different things in the things of God that we can develop a fear for. We need to learn to push through. In verse 36, I love the interplay here between Gideon's fear and God's grace. Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you've spoken, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there's dew on the fleece only, and it's dry on all the ground, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you have spoken. Yeah, Gideon's taken quite a risk here. You know, we learned from later on the record, there's 135,000 Midianites. Gideon doesn't have an army nearly that large. And so if Gideon's going to attack them, he wants to make sure God's with him. Verse 38, and it was so, for he rose up early on the next day, pressed the fleece together, and wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Verse 39. I love this. But Gideon said to God, do not let your anger be kindled against me, and I will speak but this once. Now, he'd already spoken once before, but this is the custom. He plays things down. I'll just speak this one time. Please let me test only one time with the fleece. He had already done it one time. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and on the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, for it was dry on the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. It was a prophecy tonight. Always, God said, I am always there. I think, Michael Columbaro, I think this was your prophecy. I'm always there. Don't be afraid to ask. Here's Gideon. He's not afraid to ask. God, I know this sounds like a stupid request, but I really need this to do. And God did it. And we can't be afraid to ask. And I'm going to end here. We finished Judges chapter 6. There's a lot, like I see, of little mini lessons. There's a lot of application here. There's a lot of Christians in the United States. We're a huge army. There's a lot of Christians in the United States that have not taken their Christianity seriously, or they've been misled in their Christianity, or they have blended their worship of God with a horoscope, with lucky items, with whatever. And you and I have a loving, kind, but firm voice of reason to speak into American Christianity at this time, and indeed speak into world Christianity at this time. And I think we can make an impact, and God can work with us, and we can work with him, and really have an effect on Christianity in the world today. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stay around for questions, answer, discussions, whatever, but I really appreciate the time you spend with me. I hope you enjoy being in the Word with me. I sure love being able to do this, and I trust it has blessed you guys.